John, the first question I want to ask you is share with us about your experience of working with the wild and with the wildness throughout your life and
Sure.
until that moment.
I have been working with and for wildness for most of my life, and I guess I could fairly say I've dedicated my life to wild places and wild creatures. That is my profession, is advocating for protection and restoration of wild places and wild creatures. And it's also a way of life I try to uphold. I certainly fall short often, but I try to live relatively simply. I try not to consume more than I need. I try not to drive more than I need. I try to use a bicycle when I can to lessen roadkill and pollution. But in terms of my work in advocating, I work for principally for two organizations: the Rewilding Institute, which advocates for protection and restoration of big wild places all across North America, and then regionally I work for Adirondack Council, which strives to make Adirondack Park as wild as possible. And I see these as being complementary jobs. I work half time in each organization, very much complementary work. It's the continental scale and then the regional scale. And within that regional scale is a local project that we call Split Rock Wildway. And actually, right now, we're in the middle of Split Rock Wildway. We are in Hemlock Rock Wildlife Sanctuary, a piece of land that on paper I own this, but in reality it is part of a much larger ambitious effort to protect a wildlife corridor running from Lake Champlain over there to the high peaks over there. And there is a forever wild easement on this land held by Northeast Wilderness Trust. It's about a 55-acre piece of land surrounded by much other protected land. The wildlife corridor as a whole, Split Rock Wildway as a whole, we think needs to be at least 20,000 acres of protected land to be viable for the long term. We've protected so far about 8,000 acres, so we're actually doing quite well. One of the multiple partners involved in this work: Eddy Foundation, Northeast Wilderness Trust, Champlain Area Trails, Adirondack Land Trust, and other groups, all working symbiotically to protect land and assure a continuous swath of wild forest from Lake Champlain to the mountains. So that's a little bit of how I try to exist in and celebrate wildness.
Share with us about the Spirit Sanctuary
Mm-hmm.
project and your involvement in it. So
Yeah.
what's your take on it and what's your role in it?
So Spirit Sanctuary is a conservation burial ground. That means it is green burial, but it goes beyond green burial. Green burial is basically clean and green, no chemicals. Conservation burial takes it a step farther and promises that some of the money that is used in the process of interring loved ones goes to protecting land. It goes to land conservation. So the Eddy Foundation and partners set up a conservation burial ground, again, green burial, but a step more, some years back. And my role there is chiefly I'm a gravedigger, and that's a humble task, but it's actually an important task. And I take quite a good deal of pride in grave digging. I do it with my friends Eric Rucker and Billy Amadon and Laurie House and others. But it's actually a very gratifying task to dig a hole and know that a person who cared about the land will go there and will then feed the earth. So those of us who are committed to conservation burials, we like the idea that our parts, when we that our parts will return to the earth, that our body will literally return to the earth. I like the idea very much that when I am eventually buried at Spirit Sanctuary, about 5 miles from here, my parts will slowly recycle into Split Rock Wildway. I will, in a sense, enjoy some sort of vague immortality, I think, because my molecules will end up in the trees and the birds and the insects and the coyotes that wander around or grow in Split Rock Wildway. I love that idea. I find it a very healing thought. And so I'm I am very much a part of Spirit Sanctuary as a gravedigger. I also am informally involved in trying to make decisions about how to have it be as beneficial to the community as possible. So far, Spirit Sanctuary occupies about 3 acres, but we could expand it if we get enough people and companion animals buried there. And Spirit Sanctuary, I should say, is in the middle of Split Rock Wildway, and money raised by Spirit Sanctuary to bury people, that will be recycled into the land quite literally. It will go toward additional land conservation in Split Rock Wildway.
So one more question I want to ask you is, what role can art play in the conservation efforts here, and what your hopes are for generally for art contributions here, but also for the contribution of Split Rock Arts and the artists that are gonna come into the forest?
Yeah, I think art has a much bigger role in conservation than most people realize. Science can tell us what we need to do to save certain areas and certain species, but it doesn't convince people to do that. It doesn't inspire people. It informs us, but it doesn't usually inspire us. Art can inspire us. I think we need a combination of science to help us know how much land we need to protect, where are the best places to protect next, how what are the dams most important to remove for the sake of diadromous fish like salmon and eels and so forth. Science very much helps in that way. It's essential in helping inform what we need to do on the ground. But again, it doesn't usually inspire us. I think art is critical for inspiring people to make the changes in lifestyle, in habits, in commitment to wild places that are necessary if we're actually to learn to coexist with the full range of our wild neighbors. So I believe that art can play a unique and powerful role in inspiring people to think carefully about how to be good neighbors. Art might help us understand, well, if I want to coexist with all these neighbors around here, the frogs, the songbirds, the bats, the millipedes, the fish, well, again, science can help tell us how to do it, but I think art can help convince me I want to do that. I want to learn to coexist with my wild neighbors. So I believe art plays a very important role. I believe art can inspire people to change. I believe art can inspire people to give. One of the most important things is giving. We all need to give back to the planet. We all need to give back to our bioregions. We all need to give back to our wild neighbors. Art can inspire us to do that. So I would love to see Split Rock Arts blossom in this area and reach more and more people and inspire them to give generously if they can afford to give financially to land trusts and conservation groups, or to buy and save land themselves, and inspire them to be good neighbors, to tolerate the fox or the coyote that might run through your land, to drive a little more slowly on those spring evenings when the frogs and the salamanders are trying to cross the road. Art can do that. And I'm counting on Split Rock Arts to help us complete Split Rock Wildway.
Thank you.
Where I realized that we are in a wildlife corridor, which we now call Split Rock Wildway, is right there. I climbed that tree the first time I came onto this land 30 years ago in autumn of 1994. The land was for sale. As soon as I walked on the land, I knew I wanted to buy it. And I ended up being able to get it with help from my parents. But I climbed that tree to see the surroundings. And when I got to the top, looking over at Coon Mountain and over at the lake, I realized this is a wildlife corridor. And my first realization that it was a wildlife corridor was limited. I realized it was a wildlife corridor going from Coon Mountain and those hills over there to the lake. And then over time, I realized it's bigger than that. And actually, Jamie Phillips really helped. Originally, we called this the Coon to Split Rock Mountain Wildlife Corridor. And Jamie said, well, why stop at Coon Mountain? And we began to think bigger and realized we can connect the habitat from the lake to the high peaks. And that's what we're working to do. We call it Split Rock Wildway, and Split Rock Arts is a big part of that. So that tree was where I had the epiphany, the top of that tree.
Amazing.